First, this morning, I want to express my gratitude for Acting Secretary Pat Shanahan, whom we learned yesterday will soon be leaving the Department of Defense. The Acting Secretary has served in a crucial post during challenging times and difficult circumstances. His deliberate leadership and steady focus on implementing the National Defense Strategy served the nation, the Pentagon, and the men and women of the armed forces very well. I respect his decision to withdraw his candidacy, and I hope it will bring to an end the media's scrutiny of his family. It is unfortunate that this news means we're no closer to having a Senate-confirmed Secretary of Defense. As the Senate considers the NDAA this week, the many challenges facing our nation are top of mind. We need to modernize our military to meet the challenges posed by Russia and China. We need to stay assertive against global terrorism organizations like ISIS and al-Qaeda until they are decisively defeated. We need to continue to reform and enhance critical partnerships from NATO to the Middle East to the Indo-Pacific. And of course, we face an urgent need to deter and defend against Iranian aggression. These challenges and opportunities demand strong leadership, so while the Senate still looks forward to considering a nominee to formally serve as the Secretary of Defense, we should take to heart President Trump's choice for the next acting secretary, Mark Esper, our current Secretary of the Army. Mark Esper is no stranger to the Senate. Among the many impressive stops on his resume, he served with the Foreign Relations Committee and later as National Security Advisor to then Majority Leader Bill Frist. Many of us remember his calming demeanor and his professionalism. He served in several capacities at the Pentagon as well, including as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, and immediately prior to becoming Secretary of the Army, he also built a successful career in the private sector. And all of this came after Esper's own decorated military service. His graduation from West Point was followed by Army Ranger training, which then led to serving in the Gulf War with the storied 101st Airborne. Given the precarious international situation and challenges facing our nation, I'm encouraged that an experienced, tested, and capable leader such as Secretary Esper will be at the helm in the Pentagon. And I look forward to working closely with him to defend America, our interests. Later today, the Senate will officially turn to this year's National Defense Authorization Act. Every year, this legislation focuses this chamber on one of our more fundamental constitutional duties, the common defense. Every year, the Senate approves authorizing legislation to address the needs of America's men and women in uniform. Over the past 2 years, working closely with the Trump administration and on the NDAA has yielded big results. We've authorized major investments in everything from new cutting-edge systems to improved services for military families to massive strides toward restoring the readiness of our all-volunteer force. But as the headlines are reminding us every day, there is no time to let up. In fact, just the opposite. Russia's designs on Eastern Europe and the Middle East have certainly not abated, nor has Putin's investment in long-range strike capabilities, from advanced hypersonic weapons to new missiles or stealthy submarines. Nor has China increasingly aggressive Pacific strategy, nor has Iran's hell-bent commitment to underwriting terrorism and proxy conflicts throughout the Middle East. So this year's NDAA is built with a heavy emphasis on strengthening our partnerships in the most troubled regions around the world. Of course, it also ensures the U.S. military will sustain its place as the most prepared, best equipped, and most lethal fighting force in the world. The legislation authorizes tens of billions of dollars for new battle force ships and an expansion of the Joint Strike Fighter program. It lays groundwork for expanding missile defense batteries, and it delivers a $1.4 billion increase in funding for cutting-edge research and development. And from bases across America to posts overseas, the NDAA accounts for the needs of service members and their families. It prioritizes military construction and addresses problems with military family housing. It streamlines the delivery of benefits through the Defense Health Program, and it locks in a 3.1% pay raise for uniformed personnel. Of course, our work on the floor in the coming days is just the last chapter. Our colleagues on the Armed Services Committee and their staffs have been working overtime on this impressive legislation for many weeks. So as we take the next step today, we should thank Chairman Inhofe and our colleagues for their leadership thus far. Now, Madam President, on another matter, the previous administration left a sprawling mess of regulation tangled throughout the federal government and the U.S. economy. Sweeping left-wing visions were dreamt up here in Washington and forced on farm families, domestic manufacturers, and small businesses throughout the country, with very little regard for the consequences. The reach of regulators grew longer and longer, and the burden on American prosperity became heavier and heavier. So naturally, rolling back much of this mess and putting Washington back in its place has been a major priority for the Republicans in Congress, as well as the Trump administration. But some actions were so egregious and so likely illegal that the courts put a halt to them before we could even reform or repeal them. As my colleagues recall, implementation of the so-called Clean Power Plan was frozen by a Supreme Court stay more than 3 years ago, back in 2016. The Obama administration's war on coal has already done plenty of damage in places like my home state of Kentucky. But at least this additional hammer blow on so many American livelihoods was held off. It would have weaponized a federal agency to bury energy producers and all those who depend on them under one-size-fits-all regulations with duplicative mandates and unrealistic timelines. And as production of the most affordable and reliable energy available to American families dried up, it would have left higher electricity costs in its wake. Higher domestic power prices would mean fewer American jobs here at home, with no meaningful effect on global emissions. Any rational observer would have concluded that this regulation was all pain for no gain, just good American jobs being shipped overseas. This was a bad idea that many of us here in the Senate fought to. Back in 2013 and 14, after President Obama's EPA administrator refused my request to come meet with Kentuckians, I held hearings in Kentucky about the negative impacts the plan would actually have. I worked with governors to hold off on implementation. I helped spearhead an amicus brief in the legal proceedings and led on legislation to overturn the rule. So unwinding this proposed economic self-sabotage and sticking up for working families has been a top priority of mine and many of my colleagues for years. And fortunately, it has also been a major priority for the Trump administration. Last year, they announced a proposed rule to do away with it. And later today, the EPA will be finalizing it and making it official. I look forward to the administration rolling out a new policy that upholds the rule of law, keeps the EPA within its statutory role, and encourages American energy reliability and affordability. Just one more win for all Americans who live and work in communities where affordable, homegrown American energy sources like coal still matter a great deal. Another win for states like Kentucky. It's nice to have an administration that isn't narrowly focused on just the big, blue, urban areas, but looks out for all of our country.